Hey lads, this is the first video of my new series called Memorable Mondays. In this series, we're going to be looking at memorable chess games throughout history. And what better way to start a series than to go back to the first chess game ever recorded. This game was played over 500 years ago in Valencia, Spain. This legendary game was known as Scachs d'Amor, or Chess of Love. And it wasn't just a casual match between two players. It was actually part of a poetic manuscript that set up the new modern rules of chess that we have today. Before this match, chess was a much slower paced game. The queen could only move one square diagonally, so even worse than a king today. And the bishop was limited to moving exactly 2 squares diagonally, kind of like a knight, and it could jump over pieces, but it could only go 2 squares. It couldn't go 3, it couldn't go 1. However, in the late 15th century, a new rule was put into place and the pieces changed to what we know them as of today. The queen moving like a bishop and a rook, and a bishop moving like a bishop. These new rules made chess faster and more dynamic. And so this game we're looking at today is the first game played with these new rules that we know of. This game was played in 1475. The two players were Francesc de Castellví, who was a nobleman and he played the white pieces, and the person playing black was Narcís Vinyoli, who is a poet and politician. Francesc played as Mars, the god of war, and Vinyoli played as the goddess of love, or Venus. I'll link the full Scachs d'Amor manuscript in the description of this video so you can read the whole thing in English. But it's really cool to read through it and see how the pieces play out as the poem goes. This game wasn't just a historic curiosity. It's really cool to see how this one game laid a foundation for chess as we know it today. Francesco started with the move e4, and Narcisco responded with d5, the Scandinavian defense as we know it today. Back then they didn't have any theory, so this was just them playing moves. Francisco took, and Narcisco took back with the queen. The knight came out to c3, and often when the knight comes out, at least in theory today, you attack the queen has to move. A lot of the time we see players bring the queen back to the square d6, or even sometimes over to a5. But Narcisco responded with queen back to d8. This is still theory today. People still play this, but it's just considered slightly better to put the queen on one of these squares. Francesco, being a genius as he is, developed his pieces. He got the bishop out, eyeing this square on f7. And if you know anything about chess, the f7 pawn is the weakest pawn for black. If you look at all of the other pawns, this one's defended by a rook, this one's defended by a bishop, this one's defended by a queen, a queen, a queen, this one's defended by a queen and a king, queen and a king, and this one's also defended by the bishop, the rook. But this is the only pawn in all 8 pawns that is only defended by the king, and the king is not the greatest defender. So always a good idea to try to attack that pawn. Same thing for white. The f2 pawn is very weak. Narcisco brought his knight out to f6. Francesco played knight f3, and the first mistake of the game, the bishop came out to g4, pinning this knight to the queen. So this knight is not allowed to move. I mean, it can still move. Let's say it jumps here. The bishop can take the queen. Now you may be wondering, why is this a mistake? Well, there's actually the move bishop takes f7, and if the king moves this way, then we can check the king, and when the king moves, because the king always has to move when a knight's attacking it, you can't block a knight. Let's say the king goes to c8, for example, then we can take this bishop on g4, and even though the knight can recapture, we can recapture the knight and check the king. The king's going to have to be defended by the knight block or the queen block. Either way, it's still a very bad position for black. However, Francesco, being a total idiot, didn't spot this And he instead just played the move h3. h3 is an okay move. It's a sort of natural kind of move. You have a piece in your half of the board. You want to kick that piece away. And so Narcisco took the knight and Francesco took back with the queen. And now you can see the queen is actually looking at this square and the pawn on b7 is not protected. So he's probably thinking, let me try to grab that pawn. The first blunder from Narcisco, although I think the bishop move was just equally as bad. But why is this a blunder? Because he didn't protect that pawn on b7. So queen takes b7. In this position, the rook is in danger. And how does black defend it? If you can't move a piece to defend, then you got to maybe come up with a creative way to defend. And the way that you would defend in this position is not moving the knight here, because that can be eaten. Not moving the knight here, because it can be eaten, is moving the knight to d7. And now the queen sees the rook, and the rook is defended. So that's actually what Narcisco played. I just realized I've been saying his name is Narcisco. That's completely wrong. I can't even read. I'm just going to call him Vignole, because that's easier to say. Vignole found this very nice move to defend the rook. Francesco saw this, and so he decided to bring in another piece to the attack. He brought the knight to b5, looking at this pawn, and he can actually take this pawn and check the king and hit the rook. A nice fork. Yes, it's defended by the queen, but if the queen was to take, then we would just win the queen for free. I say we, and I'm pretending that I'm playing as white. I don't know why, but the rook moved to c8 and defends the pawn on c8. And this is an inaccurate move. It wasn't best for him to play this. The rook defending here is just not as powerful as moving the bishop. It would have been much better for him to move the bishop here to defend, and that would have enabled him to be able to castle. However, he didn't do that. He moved the rook to c8, and Francesco took the pawn on a7, and now he's attacking this rook. So this rook probably needs to move again. If it goes to b8, it's defended by the queen and the knight, and it's forcing the queen to move, which would be really nice. When you force your opponent to move a piece twice, that's called tempoing the piece. And so now this piece has had to move, and we've developed our rook to b8. However, Vignole played the move knight to b6, defending his rook with the knight. And so here, Francesco took the rook. Vignole recaptured with the knight, and Francesco played d4, putting a pawn into the center. Here, Vignole developed his knight out and attacked the queen. So the queen's in danger, but Francesco, instead of moving his queen like the real OG gangster that he was, he played bishop b5, checking the king. Now, if you're in check, you have to respond to the check. You can't just capture a piece that you like, because then the king would be eaten by the bishop. So in this position, Vignole decided, I'm going to take that bishop. Francesco took the knight and again checked the king. And Vignole defended the check by blocking with the knight on d7. Francesco decides, I'm going to keep pushing that pawn. So he goes pawn to d5, trying to open up this pawn. So if this pawn captures, there's no pawn in front of the king, and so the king's going to be weaker. You could check him here. Maybe you could castle and get your rook to e1 and check the king. And when you're able to check, you're able to develop faster. Everything's just good for you if you can keep attacking the enemy king. Vignole took the pawn. Now you can see Francesco's middle name there. It's not actually his middle name. I think D means of. Like if my name was Owen of England, it would be Owen D England. But this D instead in Francesco's name doesn't stand for of. It actually D stands for development, because Francesco developed. Look at that. Bishop to e3. He just wants to get more pieces into the game. Probably the bad player that I am, I would have just gone for a stupid check that would have done nothing, because the queen could block, the bishop could block, he could castle. But Francesco likes to develop. He gets another piece into the game. Bishop comes out to d6. Black wants to castle. Rook to d1, more development. Now, I think it would have been a wee bit cooler if he had castled here. If he castles here and puts the rook on the open file, he's just developing in style. But yeah, There's also a hanging pawn here. This pawn could be captured by white, but he decides to not go for that, which I really respect. The rook comes to d1, queen to f6, and now he grabs that free pawn. Here, black decides to move his queen. I think what he's trying to do here is look at this pawn on c2 and also look at this pawn on g2. This is called a fork, when you can move one piece and attack two pieces. So an okay move. I think I would like to try to castle. The only problem with castling right now is you're going to lose the knight because the king's the only one defending the knight. So maybe moving the queen to, you know, a different square, like maybe putting the queen on e6 would have been better, because e6, then the rook can't come here because the bishop can take. So maybe this is a slightly better move, but I don't know. It's a bit ugly for Vignole. Here, Francesco plays a very tricky move. He plays the move bishop to f4, and although it shows it as a mistake, the natural response for black is probably, I see a free bishop, I'm going to take the free bishop. But taking this free bishop allows white to do something very nasty. The actual correct move here for Vignole would be to capture this pawn and attack the rook, and leave this bishop here. But Vignole is a greedy man, and he took that bishop, which allowed the quick checkmate in 2. Pause the video if you want to try to spot the checkmate in 2 that Francesco played to finish this game. Yep, he played queen takes d7, checking the king. The king has to move, and his only square is f8, and then the queen goes d8, checkmate. I think this game was really cool. It's so interesting to see that chess was played like this 500 years ago. The same game that we play today. Francesco played with a wee bit more development and aggression, and Vignole tried to defend, but he didn't defend in the most active ways, and you can see he fell apart pretty quick. The computer says that Francesco played with an 80.5% accuracy, and Vignole played with a 63.6% accuracy. Do you think you could have defended better than Vignole? Let me know in the comments. I hope you guys enjoyed my covering of this memorable game. And if you want to see more memorable games, subscribe to the channel. I'll be coming out with more every single Monday. See you lads soon.